for coming today to have the Congressman here with us. We want to thank you for coming to Berry County. We've got Ionia County here also. This is Kat Reed. She's the director of the Ionia Chamber. And even though they didn't have any attendees show up today, they're still here represented, and she's going to be doing this call for her members.
Wow.
So yes, thank you for that. And thank you to Alexa. She threw all this together for us. She's with the Small Business Association of Michigan. And that leads me right to you. We are going to have Brian Calley that is going to do the introduction of the Congressman for us. And thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Great to see you. I wanted to for a personal introduction to John. He's already been hanging around. So, some of you have actually invited him really late to your thing. Yeah, he came.
We had a great time.
Yes. Yeah, and so it's a but it's it's just how he serves. I served with John in my time in the House of Representatives and then all the time in the Senate. So when I was the Lieutenant Governor, presides over the Senate, and for those 8 years that John was served in our state Senate, and then his last 4 years were my first 4 years, only 4 years in the House, and I was kind of aspired to be like him and how he serves, how he approaches things. But he was one of those stately second term representatives when I was a freshman coming in.
That means old, right?
But really kind of, there were really, it's like just a handful of like Bill Heisinger and John Moolenaar and John Crowe. Like there's this group that were kind of special. You could tell they're all going places, and so I paid real close attention and was not surprised at all when John went from the House to the Senate and to the Congress. And also, by the way, when he ran for Congress the first time, was against somebody with unlimited resources. He does not have unlimited resources, but against somebody with unlimited resources, really outspends you like 3 to 1 or something, maybe 5 to 1, and he still won. And so it just tells you something about the shoe leather, the work ethic, the type of respect that he has on the ground, and relationships. And so I think a lot of him. He's a good friend and somebody that I'm really excited. I feel like we hit the jackpot that he's. Don't take that wrong about not saying about Peter Meyer, but to have redistricting and end up with John Moolenaar as probably our next congressman is really important. So I just wanted to come here and say that to some community leaders in Berry County, and carry that message into Ionia County too. So this is the part as far as you go south, right? So this is the furthest reach of it, but it doesn't mean that you'll get any less attention. He's always had a lot of territory to cover, so he knows how to do that. Yeah. So I appreciate you being here. So with that, take it away.
Well, thank you, Brian, and what a very kind introduction. And Brian, it's been fun to serve with him. Great Lieutenant Governor, great legislator. I still remember when I was a legislator, we had this big problem with personal property tax, and kind of the most confusing thing you could imagine. And we sat down with Brian. Brian figured it all out, figured out legislative solutions, and really was one of those things that you remember and say, how many people do you know that dig in like that, understand the process as well as just the nuts and bolts tax policy issues? And I will always remember that. I'm excited for him now with SBAM. He's really mobilizing small businesses, large businesses, people all over Michigan to really advocate and help make our state a better state. So thank you for what you're doing there as well. And but it's nice to be with you. It's appreciate our friends from Ionia County tuning in. Enjoyed being at the legislative update a few months ago.
Yes, it was great to have you there.
And,
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And appreciate being here in Berry County. It's good to see friends from years back in different roles. And But I really wanted to just have a chance to talk with you about kind of what's happening in our economy, get your insights, as well as what we can do to be helpful on the federal level. And this is an amazing time. I was on the phone with a friend of mine who owns a business. He makes snowmaking equipment, and they sell it all over the world. And he was telling me about
Joe Swift, or I mean,
Joe Leader.
Vanderbilt.
Yeah. But just the inflationary increases for his inputs and just the challenges going on. And, you talk to agricultural leaders, farmers who talk about the input prices going up for farming. When you talk about the labor issues and shortages and the need for employees for businesses, these are challenging times, and the energy issues, the high cost of. So, been thinking a lot about this on the federal level, because I think a lot of the problems have started because we were massively overspending in the federal government. And I think that's been a major contributor. And then there will be people who also understand the Federal Reserve and kind of the role there, and the need to kind of help address inflation as well. It seems like it's been a very incremental approach, kind of, chasing our tail when it comes to kind of federal policy. But there's a lot that we could be doing right now to make ourselves more energy independent. And that's something that I'm working very hard to, when you consider our natural resources here and to do things safely and make the most of our natural resources for Michigan, that's something that's jobs. It's, helps keep prices down. You think about the supply chain issues, all the, you talk to trucking companies or people who use trucking, they're having trouble getting drivers right now. And then you look at the challenges, on the coast with, different ships being backed up. A lot of challenges going on right now. So one of my goals is to really listen, see how you're affected, and what kinds of things we can be doing on the federal level to help. So that's talking with Brian. That's something that I appreciate what SBM's doing. I appreciate our chambers, because you guys are kind of the eyes and ears of our local businesses and knowing how people are affected. And I, as Lord willing, your representative, I want to be someone who can advocate effectively for you. So appreciate you all getting here.
So we could probably just do some Q&A, and I don't know if you, for format wise, if you wanted to kind of go around, but maybe I could just kick off it. You could set some context in terms of the spending. For a long time, federal government is deficit spending kind of forever. I think there's always been a question how much before it's a problem. Like $1 trillion a year seemed like it wasn't causing any problem. So like somewhere between $1 trillion and $5 trillion, it becomes a problem, right? Where we have a lot of kind of unsustainable demand and market imbalances, and then also and then of course very predictable inflation. For the Federal Reserve, my only complaint is that they took 6 months too long to start. I think the actions they're taking while they're uncomfortable, or they don't have a choice at this point. Just should have been 6 months earlier to make it less painful. I saw some from the president and from the White House, some claims of like record reductions in deficit spending, but it seemed almost silly. They're comparing it to the extra $3 trillion from federal spending and some of those programs going out. Could you give some context? The president just proposed a budget, sold it as big deficit reducing budget, but how does that compare to, say, a pre-pandemic year?
Yeah, well, you make a great point, because when you consider the $5 trillion that we extra spent on basically COVID and other things, it's, and when you start pushing back and saying, okay, we're going to get back to normal life, that's a big change. To me, the biggest, early on when we had the CARES Act, you remember that? I was all in on the CARES Act. And the reason being is it was going to go for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program that many of your businesses probably, benefited from. It was going to help people who were losing their jobs, who no fault of their own, government shutdowns, all the different issues that we were facing early on with the pandemic. It was something that would get protective equipment out to people, help hospitals be sustained. To me, that was a worthy investment, helping our country navigate a very difficult time. About a year ago in March, the American Rescue Plan was another $2 trillion. And really, it wasn't designed so much for, helping navigate the pandemic. It was just kind of getting money out the door. And so now you have a lot of states, a lot of local governments figuring out, okay, what are we going to do with this surplus funding? And even President Obama's, one of his advisors said, early on when President Biden was saying, okay, this inflation is going to be transitory, you don't have to worry about it. And he was saying, no, this $2 trillion is going to be the start of this inflationary huge problem, and Biden owns it. And so I think now when the new budget is proposed, okay, it doesn't have that $2 trillion, it doesn't have the CARES Act trillions, it doesn't have, so yes, it's better than, the spending during the emergency. But yeah, it's kind of an artificial number when you really consider what has been spent. But when you consider we've got a $30 trillion debt, national debt right now, and that's something that future generations are going to have to deal with. And the more inflation, the higher the interest rates go, the more we're paying interest on our national debt. Right now, I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and about 2/3 of the federal spending right now is basically not under appropriations. It's simply automatic spending. It's not discretionary where we actually can say, no, we're going to cut here, we're going to do this here. It's based on formulas and things kind of outside of the control directly of Congress. And so when you think about it that way, you realize, yes, we need a balanced budget amendment. Yes, we need to be more disciplined in our spending, and we can be. But we also have to look, and this is one of the things that Brian and Rick Snyder and our state legislature did so well, kind of dealing with these long-term costs in government. And that's something we have to do on the federal level. And those are going to be challenging things to work on. But those are some of the drivers of the long-term debt that we're experiencing. Any other questions?
I would just ask, I don't know anything about you.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit about you personally,
Yeah.
about where you live?
Yeah.
and
It's a great
What
question.
your dog's name is?
Well, let me start. Our dog's name is Lily.
Okay.
Dachshund Beagle. She's 10 years old. People think she's a puppy when we walk around because she looks like a puppy beagle, but she's really half dachshund, half beagle. We just moved to Caledonia, so not far away at all. I grew up, have represented, Midland for many years. With the new districting, it's interesting. The district I currently represent, the 4th district, was divided into 4 different congressional districts. And so in looking at it, I had represented about half of the current 2nd district. I'd represented about 15% of where my hometown is now in, with Genesee County, Saginaw County, Bay County. And I looked at it, my wife is from Grand Rapids originally. And so I've been promising her for about 26 years that we would at some point be in West Michigan. I'm like, okay, now's the time. So we, as of about 3 weeks ago, moved to Caledonia. And so we're excited. What's that?
From the,
From Midland, yeah. So we're excited about that. My wife's been widowed, so when we got married, she had 3 children. Age 33, her husband died of a brain tumor. So when we got married, we then had 3 additional children, so total of 6, and they are North Carolina, South Carolina, Chicago, 1 at Michigan State, 1 in Canton, that's where our grandchildren are, not far from where you are. And then 1 who recently graduated from West Point is in London right now, will be stationed in Germany. So 3 have served in the military. I was originally a chemist. That was I went to Hope College in Holland, Michigan. Played a little bit of basketball there. I played basketball with a guy named Matt Neal, who was from
Oh,
Hastings.
yeah.
So do you remember Matt Neal?
Yeah.
And yeah, he was about 6'5". Yeah, very, very good basketball player. And so was a chemistry major there because growing up in Midland, Michigan, one neighbor's a chemist, one neighbor's a chemical engineer. And that's kind of like what, oh, are there other jobs? And then I got kind of interested in politics and government, went back to school, got a master's degree in government. And that's where I started taking classes and getting academic credit for the books that I was reading and interested in. But as a chemist, I never really studied. And then ended up serving in the state legislature. I served in local government. I was even a charter school administrator for a few years when our kids were growing up. And I look at it and I think, people say, what did you do before you came to Congress? And, some people say, well, I was in the military, or I was a teacher, or I was a doctor, or I was a banker. Like, well, let's see, I was a chemist, and then business development. So it's kind of this, but every one of those experiences, Greg could tell you this too, it's like every one of those experiences, you learn something about government, its impact, kind of how that works. So if you're ever in a position where you're legislating or regulating, you have a better understanding of how people are affected. That's probably a longer.
Well, that was a good overview.
Congressman, I know that you probably met a bunch of folks on the way in, but it might be helpful to go around the table and just say your name, business that you're representing, and just maybe a little bit about your business. We could start on this.
Okay, I'm Janie Bergeron. I run Green Gables Haven. It's the domestic violence shelter here in Berry County. Got the invitation. I had a chance to be down at my event in February, just looking forward to hearing more from him. So,
Which was a highlight. I might add.
Thank
Really
you.
fantastic.
so just decided to come and hear what he had to say.
I'm Mike Bergeron. I am moral support.
Recently retired.
From that moral support?
Oh,
No.
Signed up for that.
Okay, all right. I'm Michelle Schedule. I'm Executive Director of Peter Cedar Creek Institute, Hastings and Nature Center. Here to learn. And maybe if we have time, I'd like to ask you what your thoughts on climate change.
Eric Chaskowski with Bradford White. I deal with government affairs. We're a manufacturer in Middleville, Michigan, for water heaters, storage tanks, residential, commercial, gas, electric. So basically anything from under counter to large commercial application. Public people here talk through some issues for us.
Yeah, we might have some more on the Q&A, but I'll just give you a quick overview of our business. Pete Catula, I'm Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Water Heater Division. Our parent corporation is out of Philadelphia area, Camper, Pennsylvania. We have another location in Niles, Michigan, and another location in Rochester, New Hampshire. But our biggest location is here. We have about 1,600 employees there, about 1,350 UAW members, and the rest salary, engineering, our product R&D, everything is there. We've been on a continuous growth path, both with our footprint, growing our units produced, as well as our employment base, just continual growth phase as we pick up market share and improve our products and go out there and beat our competitors. We definitely have some interest around climate change questions, some other things, then I think I'll maybe defer to these guys for some of the Q&A stuff that's kind of on our ongoing list. So,
Bob Wolper, also with Rapid Light Corporation, Manager of Government Relations. For that, worked with yourself and the Lieutenant Governor and the legislature. for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And Greg as well.
Greg Moore, Community Government Affairs Manager for Consumers Energy, and also the chair of the Berry County EPA and also on the governance board. So spent a lot of time up here working with the team. We have a great team up here. And we also are the provider for electric and natural gas in this region. So that would obviously one of our largest customers and very important customer. But growth is phenomenal. I mean, we're seeing projects like we haven't seen in a long time coming up in the work. So load growth is a huge issue for us in all parts of the state, quite frankly. So we have a lot of interest in making sure we can continue the solar panels and other things to continue on our mission to fulfill our plan for the state. And it's become a challenge, to be quite honest.
Hi, Kim Martin from the Berry County Chamber, EDA. The business manager. I've been there for over 8 years and great place to work, great county to work in. So I'll let Jen talk more about Chamber.
And I'm Jennifer, president of Berry County Chamber and Economic Development Alliance. I was actually at the Capitol yesterday. We were up in the balcony for your session, so you didn't say hi, but our leadership class was there on tour yesterday. And I spent the day with your wife, actually. Julie took us around. So anyway, and I live in Caledonia, so we can do much.
Okay.
But our biggest issues are workforce development, like everyone, housing, childcare, and broadband. Those are our four key areas of focus. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on those areas.
Sure.
She nailed it. I mean, she's just doing all of the heavy lifting for me today. So you've met me. I'm Kat from Ionia Chamber. Those are definitely the biggest issues, with the two that I would say being the ones I'm hearing the most conversation about, being housing and workforce and broadband. So 3.
Yeah.
Childcare is definitely an issue, but it's just not as talked about between our member base as, and maybe that's because they're not used to going to the chamber to talk about those types of things. So
Right.
not that it's not there.
Well, great. Well, trying to think where to start with some of the questions. But, you know, let me just first start with broadband, because, you know, I think for Michigan, that's a huge issue. I mean, we saw during the pandemic, you know, kids were learning online. Seniors were using telemedicine. You know, businesses, people working remotely. I mean, if ever there was a sort of a test case of how important it is to have access to the internet, we've been in it the last couple of years. And I think one of our strengths in Michigan is it's a great quality of life, but it's also an area where we have some real deficits. You know, I'm traveling across 20 counties now, and some areas it's really strong, other areas not so strong. And you know, there's been a lot of funding from the federal level. I know the state has worked on this as well. A lot of the, you know, different, you know, companies are building out. You know, I spend time with people, you know, the rural electric cooperatives who are doing that. I know AT&T, different providers are, you know, accessing grants to work on this. It's not happening fast enough. And so my hope is that, you know, you have it on the provider side, but then I also wanted to create some support for the demand side. And so what I mean by that is I introduced a bill called the Boost Act. And it's sort of technology neutral. It doesn't favor any one company or another, but it does help promote wireless access to the internet. So for instance, the legislation, we give up to $300 tax credit for people to buy like a mobile hotspot or a booster, something that would then enable them to access some kind of technology, wireless technology. So probably the most, I don't know, visible aspect, you know, if you've heard of Starlink, you know, Elon Musk's company, you know, they are shooting up these low orbit satellites, and their goal is to have rural America covered by their low orbit satellites so that anyone who would want to access the internet through that technology could. Now, they've got a waiting list. I have no idea where they are in terms of their goals. But what I do agree is right now, the cost of accessing that is a lot higher than other kinds of costs. So I think that tax credit, what it does is helps people, cuts down on, it's a one-time tax credit to buy some technology, but it also incentivizes more activity, because at the end of the day, it doesn't help to be able to tell someone, yeah, you're going to get the internet at your business or in your home. Maybe 10 years from now, by the time we build out the fiber, and people just can't wait that long. And so rather than just simply throwing more federal dollars, I thought this tax credit idea would be sort of a demand side incentive. We've got bipartisan support for it. We don't have, Speaker Pelosi has not agreed to bring it up for a vote. So we're hoping maybe to put it into some other legislation that may go through, or at some point be able to take it up as a standalone bill. But to me, you want to have both the building out of the fiber, which in the long term is probably the most important, but also enable people in the short term to have an ability to access the internet. So that's one thing. I won't be as long on every other subject. What were some of the other, you'd mentioned, some of the.
Could you hit on, no, you mentioned in your opening energy independence.
Yeah.
And maybe tie that to the current administration's race for decarbonization.
Yeah. First of all, I'm kind of an all of the above energy guy. So to me, oil and gas, clean coal, I'm not opposed to any of that. In fact, I think we want to make wise use of our natural resources. When I think of, kind of the administration, sort of the idea that they just want to shut down fossil fuels, to me, that's, I think, very short-sighted. It's something where we are probably the cleanest country when it comes to developing those resources and using those. And what we've done with these kind of policies is we've empowered other countries that are not nearly as environmentally sensitive as we are, and kind of put them in the driver's seat. It's also a national security issue. Like when I didn't even know until Russia invaded Ukraine. I didn't even know we were importing Russian oil. I thought, well, we have oil here. We have other relationships. Why are we doing that? Why are we going sort of on bended knee to places like Russia, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia? Why aren't we developing our own resources?
Latest is Iran.
Iran, yeah. Yeah, so it's really, I think now, are there emerging technologies? You mentioned solar. When I was in my previous district, well, my current district, but I won't have the new district, but there's a place called Hemlock Semiconductor. And you're familiar with them, they make polycrystalline silicon, which is like one of the most pure substances you can, and it goes into solar panels. It goes into, it's kind of the raw material. What we found out with them is that China was doing everything they could to prohibit them from entering into the Chinese markets, and they were trying to have a lock on every aspect of the supply chain for solar panels. And, so we've been, kind of working through trade policy, other policies, because we ought to have a supply chain of solar here in Michigan and in this country, because the cost of solar is coming down. Now, there's a lot of people who know a lot about this. Now, solar and wind, it's not so much baseline, base load supply. You want to have them as part of the mix, but you also want to have other kinds of energy resources. And so, so I think we have an opportunity, especially with the way China is conducting itself. You know, I think in the next Congress, one of the biggest challenges we'll have to face is how do we deal with China? You know, in the past, we've really tried to engage them, bring them over to our principles. You can tell that's not really working. Sadly, it's the Chinese Communist Party that's in charge there. And they're stealing our technology. They're putting up barriers for our businesses, and they're also kind of bribing other countries, you know, through their initiatives. And then, you know, there's a cost to that. And if ever they were going to show their true colors, I feel like during this Russia invasion of Ukraine, when they've basically been silent. And when Putin and Chairman Xi are spending hours together at the Olympics, that's just not acceptable for any kind of leader in the world, I think. So I'm going to be very interested to see what we can do. I don't want to say China's an enemy. They're a customer of many of our businesses. They are an adversary, and they are becoming a military adversary, and they're also becoming, you know, definitely an economic adversary. And so I think our policies need to reflect that. And so that, but
as a follow-up, John, though, to that, there's a, so as we think about just the dramatic changes in energy, you know, consumers breaking new ground all the time, how they can use some renewable sources for base load, even, you know, if the net mix is right and the location, all that kind of stuff. But but when it comes to like you know, I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect on the battery side of things and kind of a push for electric vehicles, which, you know, I've got a hybrid vehicle myself, but so many components for batteries come out of the ground. Mining has to happen. And I feel like there's like a disconnect saying, well, batteries are the clean way, but making batteries is so energy intensive and requires so much digging of natural resources out of the ground, in some cases very sensitive. And then when it comes to things like, well, I mean, like for automotive, I mean, there's actually like lithium and palladium. I mean, those come from Ukraine and Russia, right? And so it's really, I think it's like presented as a simple thing, you know, like let's just go to batteries. But then at the same side, okay, but then we have to commit ourselves to like massive mining operations and to meet that level of demand. And then also, you know, the energy infrastructure, it looks really different to power vehicles than to power our houses. And you know, in terms of the infrastructure that's required in the garage and the base load that's being carried, I mean, all of it, it's a big transformation. And maybe it's the right way to go, but I do worry about this push to kind of force the entire market to automotive electric when, I mean, even Brownstown Township, Michigan, General Motors and Honda have a partnership, and they're still researching and building the fuel cells, you know, with hydrogen, and which and that's water, right, in terms of its discharge. And so it just seems like the kind of, I don't say interference is the right word, but it just seems like there's a big push that, okay, automotive has to go a certain way. And there are really pretty serious supply chain security and environmental concerns with that way, that if you look at only the end, you say, well, that's cleaner than gas. But all the stuff that happens before that is not.
What do you do with the batteries at the end? I mean, how do you dispose of them in an environmentally, you know, friendly way? Yeah. No, I agree. I love the innovation that's going on right now. I think it's fantastic. You mentioned, you know, the fuel cell, the hydrogen, the different, you know, the technologies with batteries, and, you know, it's come a long way. But I do feel that, first of all, we have to have the market driving it. And like you said, we need to look at the overall picture when it comes to energy usage and sustainability. So for instance, I've mentioned Hemlock Semiconductor, making all this raw material for solar panels, which everybody says, well, great, solar panels. I didn't mention that they were the largest user of energy on the grid in the state of Michigan to make that product, right? So you have to kind of calculate all that in when you're looking at sustainability and all that. So, I mean,
The interesting point though is they by far are the largest energy user of our system, period.
Yeah.
Without question. The new battery technologies that are coming in are going to be a factor of 2 larger than that.
wow,
So when you talk about, as Brian did, about the resources that are necessary to construct and build what we're talking about building, not to mention the marijuana grow facilities that take tremendous amounts of energy and rarely choose to locate in those areas where we already have facilities, right? So now we're having to build out infrastructure for very large facilities located in areas that were not intended to be built for those types of things, and who carries the cost for that? We know that a nascent industry like batteries and marijuana, there's going to be some that won't survive. They can't. They're just going to, And so what happens to those costs? The hundreds of millions of dollars that are invested in this state, that a company goes under and says, I'm sorry, I know we plan to pay for this over 10 or 15 years, but after 7, we're done. So we're concerned as a company about the quick acceleration of all these investments. So not only are we having to expend money on building new solar and wind facilities, but also rebuild the grid essentially. So newer, taller, thicker poles, heavier wire, new kinds of high-tech circuitry that will take energy from 2 directions instead of a traditional 1 direction. I mean, all of these things we're basically taking the most complex machine that's ever been built by man and rebuilding it all at the same time while we're redoing our infrastructure for generation as well. And so what happens is people see that every month. And they remind us every month that they don't appreciate that.
right.
But it's, we have to be mindful as a company as to all of our customers who are like, yeah, every kilowatt hour counts, buddy. And we're trying to be very sensitive to that. And the mandates coming from a lot of it federal, some of it state, it just keeps pushing. Just keeps pushing.
Well, when you look at people's kind of what they spend their money on, I mean, if they're paying more at the pump, if they're paying more at the grocery store, and then paying more to heat their home, it's challenging for people, especially seniors.
Oh, this is really hard. It's not good. Why is it hard to keep, it's hard to keep my mouth shut. I mean, Greg, what are your options? I mean, and energy is not the only thing related to climate change. I mean, it is such a complex issue, but it's kind of like you have to pick the best of 2 evils. We can't keep going the way we've been going. We just simply can't. We just simply can't keep going the way that we've been going. It's been proven scientifically. It's
And I think that's,
we're seeing the results of that. And it's not just energy, it's the way we farm, it's all the different things that we're doing. And so just like earlier when gas went up, we bitched, but we survived and we drove less, and we lived through it, so we may have to make some adjustments. And it just seems like we need people that can make those tough calls, that really care enough to realize maybe they don't know it all. And I'm always interested in how you all learn about all these issues out there. I mean, how much time can you spend learning about I mean, we're a nature center and our staff is working on learning about climate change and what it means, and watching documentaries and trying to go to YouTube and seeing different points of view in which we agree, we believe is true and not true. And it makes me wonder, how do you learn about, inform, educated opinions about this stuff to be able to lead us through this tough time. And that maybe is a question as much as a comment.
Sure, no, we're
I'm
really-
sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I mean, we clearly we can't keep going the way that we're going. Because we have this thing where we kind of pretend like America is a planet. And so we have policies that we think we're doing the right thing here, but if all the industry that we needed for America were located in America, the carbon footprint of the world would be dramatically decreased. Because what we kind of inadvertently push our industry to places where they don't have to follow rules. They're pumping thousands of tons of carbon into our atmosphere. And we're pretending like it doesn't count because it's not in America, it's there. And our answer is, and unfortunately tends to be, we got to clamp down here more, but what we're actually doing is pushing more
You're right,
over there where they don't have, so
yeah.
it really, it's a global problem, and it's just like, it just seems like we're inadvertently making it not just worse, like a lot worse. Because if you can't, they couldn't even do, they had to change the Olympic Games in Beijing because the air quality is just so bad.
Right.
And because they literally, the health of their people doesn't really count much. And certainly the health of the planet doesn't count much there. And that's where I think we've got to figure out how to influence getting others to act more like we are in terms of the stewardship to these things. But I just concerned that I heard like in America, cows and lawnmowers are the worst, polluters at this point. And it's like, if we've gotten to the point where those are the worst, then like in terms of carbon production, then I think we're doing pretty good. It's there's only so much we have to influence other places and maybe how they do business with us and how trade happens or whatever. But it just seems like that's the place where we inadvertently made things a lot worse by essentially forcing industry to go places where there are no standards. And it's the same, we're breathing the same air.
Well, to me, it's a disconnect between regulations and policy. Because regulations push us out of the country because we can't comply with it here, or it's too costly. But then the policy say, well, we want to bring jobs back to America. Well, this is kind of counterproductive to that. So we don't take a comprehensive enough view of these things. So, okay, if we want to be better for the environment, go back to the point about energy independence. Well, that's going to force a material dependence. Materials that we may have some here, but China and Russia control a lot of that around the world, not just in their countries. So we have to understand the whole picture of, just because this may be perceived as bad, the alternative is not necessarily good either.
There's some different sort of initiatives that have bipartisan support. Carbon sequestration. There's a lot of sort of emerging technologies, efforts to try and develop that. I forget, it's 45Q, I think is sort of an incentive tax issue when it comes to carbon sequestration and, promoting carbon capture technology. Kind of the old fashioned way, we've talked with, there's a guy who heads up there's kind of our Republican lead on natural resources. And, this idea, he's kind of got this trillion trees idea. And when you look at some of these kinds of things that can be done, just sort of using that as carbon capture, it's not always the same solutions, and they're actually things that can kind of build support kind of across the board. So,
yeah.
But, we can talk more about it. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, we have about 5 more minutes, so anyone wants to throw in maybe enough time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Was there one that was brought up that we didn't talk about? I know you had a whole,
What about the workforce?
the workforce. Yeah.
Everybody's.
Well,
You won't need the whole time.
Well, you know, it didn't help, you know, early on, you know, we had the extra $600 a week for people in the CARES Act to help people who were losing their jobs because of government shutdowns, different things. That should have been a very limited thing. The idea that that was extended for another, I don't know how many months. I think it really created the wrong incentive for our workforce. And, you know, there were some people that wanted to keep kind of doing that perpetually. That's terrible. So I think that's one issue that on the federal level. And then I think we really need to be creative in terms of working with the federal funding, with our community colleges, with our workforce development leadership to say, what can we do to really, in a shorter period of time, prepare people for the jobs that are out there? And, you know, you guys would know, okay, it's these jobs, you know, it's the skilled trades, it's truck drivers, it's, you know, you can kind of go through all these different fields and say, there's a need there, they're good paying jobs, and we ought to have systems in place that really can move people into them who want to quickly. And so kind of the incentive to work, but then also preparing people to work, I think is, you know, in the agriculture area, we've got to reform our H-2A visas. You know, it's just a tragedy that, you know, when it comes to agriculture, a lot rely on H-2A visas, and there are jobs, there's a need to get our food out of the field, and there's this bureaucratic process. And there's probably other areas too where we need to, you know, I know on Mackinac Island, for instance, H-2B visas. You know, there were Michigan businesses that couldn't even open because they couldn't get enough workers, because the local supply isn't there. And then when you have this bureaucratic process for H-2B visas, we couldn't get people. So, I mean, there's all these things kind of along the line. One of the things we're working on is a commitment to America. And basically, some of you may remember the Contract for America back in 1994 when Republicans were in the minority. And we said, okay, if we get the majority, what would we do legislatively to improve the lives of everyday Americans? Well, we're working on that in kind of a grassroots way in Congress right now. And workforce is a big part of that, to say, okay, if we have a Republican majority, here are the legislative priorities we have to help make sure we have the workforce we need. And that's going to be a big part of it.
How many openings do you have?
We typically always have at least 100. But it's a bigger, you know, it's much bigger than Barry County. It's a national problem.
Yeah.
The statistics I saw recently were that there's almost 2 openings for every unemployed person right now.
Yeah.
So immigration is a huge part of it. So nationally, you know, it's not just farm and hospitality. It's across the board. We've got you know, we need your help to help really make that legal immigration good thing for the country, right?
Yeah,
Not the way we used to talk about immigration. It
well,
needs to change.
it does. You know, and just, you know, you'd asked me a little bit about my background. So my grandfather came from the Netherlands, was a migrant farm worker, saved up money, ended up buying a farm in Indiana. And, you know, my dad was raised on that farm. My mom was on another farm in the area. And you look at that and you say, okay, that's kind of the American dream where people came to this country, contributed, and so many stories like that. Right now, we've got such a broken system that the legal immigration process is cumbersome, bureaucratic, not working. And then you've got our borders are not being respected not being enforced. The rule of law is in chaos at the border. And so you create all these other incentives for people to come illegally. And, you know, and I totally get it. You know, I was down in McAllen, Texas, where you have people just coming across in droves. And you have families just coming across in droves. And you'd say, I understand they want a better life. You know, there ought to be a process for people to come legally that's not bureaucratic, cumbersome, and orderly, respecting the rule of law. But at the same time, our border agents are helping as a social service agency at the border. There are people bringing across fentanyl. There's human trafficking. I mean, I talked to the border agents and they have these fast boats that can interdict, you know, rafts and all this. They said, you know, we can come up and we can stop this, but the cartels, the people who are driving this, they'll start throwing children overboard. And so that's what we end up doing. We end up rescuing the children. And by the way, when, you know, the money that these cartels are making from this illegal activity, we are like paying the mafia in Mexico. I mean, that there's just no. So I think there is a policy that should work where you secure the border, improve the legal immigration system, and that would be a win-win. Now, in Washington, D.C., it's very hard to do that because, you know, you need people working together with those two goals. And it has to, you know, and some people don't agree with this, but I believe it has to start with securing the border. Because until you secure the border, there's no way that people are going to say, we want to have this, you know, change in making it immigration easier, because you're just creating a magnet for more people to come illegally. And so it has to start with securing the border. That's going to be one of the priorities we have. The president has really turned a blind eye to this. You know, he sent Kamala Harris to the border. She didn't even go to one of the areas that's most concerned, and she hasn't been back since, hasn't had a single idea. They're basically just saying, we don't have a border. And so that's hard to explain to people who come here legally and wait their turn in line and are contributing as legal immigrants. So we've got a lot of work to do on that.
Congressman, we are at time, so we certainly appreciate
Thank
you
you.
coming
Well,
out.
thanks so much for
Thank
having
you.
me. I really appreciate it. Wonderful seeing everybody. And Brian, thank you for your leadership. Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you.